Welcome to the next video. So in this video, we're talking about how do you find the other endpoint when you have the midpoint. And so last video, we talked about what the midpoint was and how do you find it when you have the two ends. But let's assume we have our fantastic illustration here. Wonderful bit of graphs. Wonderful bit of graphs. Let's say we have this point over here, and like I talked about with graphs, let's go ahead and just put our tick marks down so we're easy to count. So that's 3 up on the y-axis and -4 over on the x-axis. Let's say this is our endpoint, 3, -4. And then our midpoint is, right here. And so that point, our midpoint, is going to be -1 up 2. Now, can you guys spot the mistake I made already? I hope so. It's that I flipped my x and my y. When I talked about how important it is that it's x comma y, it's absolutely essential. So it's not 3, -4. The -4 is our x. So it needs to be -4, comma 3. Double checking, working slow, rereading your work is how you pay attention and make sure you don't miss any of those other small details. So our midpoint is -1, comma, +2. And so let's say the endpoint -4, comma 3, and the midpoint -1, comma 2. Where is the other endpoint? There's a couple of layers to talk about this and a couple of ways we can approach this. And one of them is graphically. We know that the midpoint's in the middle and the endpoint's on the end. And it's going to be the same distance. It's going to be congruent on either side. And so when we take this distance, that is, remembering slope, our x and our y components, talking about those separately, we're going down 1 and then over 3. It means our other endpoint has to match. We have to be able to go down 1 and then over 3. So our other endpoint has to be right here. So graphically, it makes sense to be able to just count to our other endpoint. Now, if I look on the graph and I count that out, that's going to be +2 over on the x and then up 1 on the y. So our other endpoint is 2, 1. Woohoo! Fairly easy, fairly simple, being able to count it and pay attention to our y and our x pieces. So there's another way to think about this, because what we essentially said when we started was that we had an endpoint and we did not know what the x and the y was for our other one. Before we counted, before we worked out in green what the 2 and the 1 was, we didn't know. We only had our endpoint and our midpoint. And so we can solve this algebraically, which is useful when we're working with larger numbers that don't make sense to graph or will honestly just take too long to count. And so let's go ahead and take these numbers, the endpoint and the midpoint, and apply it to our formula, or apply it to our equation. Because remember, our equation was just a point x comma y. And so that midpoint equation, the x part was the first part of our endpoint plus the second endpoint divided by 2, and then the first part of our y endpoint, the second part of our y endpoint, all divided by 2. And that's going to give us our midpoint. If we don't know what the midpoint, or if we don't know what one of those endpoints are and we want to solve this algebraically, we're able to just plug in the pieces that we know and then solve like an algebraic equation. And so what we had above was that we had the endpoint negative 4, 3. And we had the midpoint negative 1, 2. So let's plug in what we know. What we know is that this part is our x. That's going to give us the x part of our midpoint. And we know that the x part is negative 4. And so let's plug in the negative 4 that we know. And it could go in either spot. It's not going to make a difference. I'm going to put it in the first spot. Negative 4 plus the unknown x we're looking for. All divided by 2 is going to equal the midpoint, but we do know that the midpoint is negative 1. And then we can solve that to get the x part of our missing endpoint. So the other endpoint is a point, so it's going to be comma with parentheses. Let's solve this equation for x in order to work it out. Multiply by the 2 on both sides over here. So multiply by the 2, multiply by the 2. Because of the fact that we're multiplying and dividing by 2, they cancel out on the side with the x. And so we're just working with then the negative 4 plus our x equal to negative 2. Now, in order to get our x by itself, we just need to undo the negative 4, and we're able to undo the negative 4 by adding by 4. So add by 4, add by 4. Our value of x is going to be equal to positive 2. And, well, what do you know? When we look back at our drawing, that's what we got. We got positive 2 for x. Just to recap, we use the average equation. So we used what we know about averages. We plugged in what we knew, that this average is going to give us our midpoint. So we set it equal to our midpoint, because remember, the equal sign means is. The average is our midpoint. We plugged in the x that we did know, the midpoint that we did know. We left the other one, the unknown, as just x, and then we solved to get 2. So the other midpoint has 2 for the x part. Now we do the exact same thing for our y. We know that the y for our endpoint is 3. So we have 3 plus our unknown y, all divided by 2, equal to 2. And that's the y part of our midpoint. And now we're able to solve, and we'll be able to get our value of y. That is our other endpoint. So we'll start by the same way as we started before. We'll start by multiplying by 2 on both sides. The reason why is because in both examples we're dividing by 2, and multiplication undoes that division. So multiply by 2, multiply by 2. That means that our 3 plus y is equal to 4. And now we're able to solve for y by subtracting on both sides. Subtract the 3, subtract the 3. Our value of y2 is equal to 1. And that's exactly what we are looking for. Our other endpoint is at 2, 1. And so working through it as an equation is incredibly useful. The only thing you have to pay attention to is what the average is. The average is adding up the points we're looking at in dividing by 2, and the points we're looking at are the endpoints, because the midpoint is our average. It's the average, which means it's in the middle. And so, good luck. Thank you. See you in the next video.